Chapter 1. The Day They Vanished. The Adirondack Mountains have always carried a strange duality. To tourists, it's a place of postcard beauty. Rolling peaks dusted in autumn gold, lakes shimmering like liquid glass, trails that feel endless and untamed. But to locals, the forest has another side. It's a place that doesn't just welcome you in. It keeps things, memories, secrets. Sometimes, people. October 12th, 2 years before the discovery, was supposed to be nothing more than a day trip. 32-year-old Emily Carter packed up her Subaru with snacks, hiking boots, and her 7-year-old son, Jacob, a boy with restless energy and a love for adventure. Neighbors remembered seeing them that morning. Emily is loading the car, Jacob bouncing in the driveway, backpack slung too loosely over one shoulder. He'd beg his mom to take him on a real hike, not just the short neighborhood trails. Emily had agreed. It was fall break. The weather was clear, and the Adirondacks were only an hour's drive from their small upstate town. They never came back. The last sightings. At a gas station near Keene Valley, a security camera captured Emily at the pump. She looked casual, even cheerful. Her blonde hair pulled back in a loose bun, sunglasses perched on her head. Jacob could be seen in the passenger seat, sipping a juice box, tapping at a handheld game. That footage, time-stamped 10:42 a.m., was the last confirmed sighting of them alive. Hours later, when Emily's parents couldn't reach her, they assumed she'd lost service in the mountains. By evening, worry crept in. Calls went unanswered. By the next morning, her car hadn't returned to the driveway. Her father drove to the trailhead parking lots himself. And there it was, Emily's Subaru, parked neatly, locked, empty. Inside were the wrappers of a half-eaten granola bar, Jacob's hoodie tossed in the back seat, and Emily's wallet in the glove compartment. Nothing about the car screamed panic, but the absence of mother and child sent a chill through everyone who saw it. The search begins. Within hours, the Adirondack Rangers and local sheriff's department had organized a search party. Volunteers poured in neighbors, hikers, off-duty firefighters. They scoured trails, calling Jacob's name until their voices cracked. Dogs picked up a faint scent near a popular path, but lost it within a mile. No footprints, no discarded items, no sound. The forest swallowed every trace. Helicopters circled overhead. Heat sensors scanned the treetops. Still nothing. By the third day, hope had already begun to fray. Searchers whispered among themselves. How could a mother and her child just vanish in daylight? Even a misstep, even a fall, would have left some kind of sign. Theories in the shadows. The town of Hollowbrook, where Emily lived, quickly became a storm of rumors. Some whispered about abduction, a stranger lurking along the trails. Others claimed Emily might have staged it, that she wanted to start over somewhere else. Those who knew her, though, rejected that outright. Emily was devoted to Jacob. She was a teacher's aide, barely made ends meet, and had no history of instability. Then, there were the darker theories. The Adirondacks are vast, nearly 6 million acres of wilderness. It isn't the first time someone's gone missing there. Locals told hushed stories of the forest taking people. Cases from decades earlier, hunters, campers, entire families, disappeared without explanation. It didn't help that an old legend resurfaced. One hikers joked about a section of the woods they called the Hollow Mile. Supposedly, people stepped onto that path and were never seen again. Of course, investigators didn't buy folklore, but the lack of evidence gnawed at them. Even for the seasoned rangers, it was baffling. People leave trails. People leave signs. But Emily and Jacob had left nothing. The family's plea. Emily's parents appeared on local news stations, their faces pale with exhaustion. Her mother clutched Jacob's favorite toy truck, while her father begged anyone with information to come forward. "You don't just lose 2 people," he said, his voice breaking. "Somebody knows something. Please." Tips poured in, sightings in neighboring towns. A claim that Emily had been seen boarding a bus. A stranger insisting Jacob matched a boy in a diner. All of them dead ends. By week 2, the search officially shifted from rescue to recovery. For the Carters, the language change was devastating. And yet, no recovery ever came. The forest stayed silent. Winter swept over the Adirondacks. Snow buried the trails, sealing whatever secrets might have been there. The case went cold. Detectives filed their reports with frustration. No evidence of foul play. No signs of accident. Nothing to suggest where Emily and Jacob had gone. It was as if the woods had swallowed them whole. For 2 years, the family lived with that void. 2 birthdays passed without Jacob. Holidays came and went with an empty chair at the table. Emily's parents refused to move, convinced that one day there'd be a knock on the door, but the knock never came. A dog in the woods. And then, on an ordinary autumn morning, 2 years to the week since Emily and Jacob vanished, a hunter named Daniel Cray set out with his retriever. He wasn't looking for answers. He wasn't even thinking about the Carters. He just wanted venison, the quiet of the trees, and his dog by his side. But sometimes the forest doesn't care what you're looking for. Sometimes it decides it's time to give something back. The dog caught a scent, darted off the path, and began to dig. Daniel shouted after him, annoyed, until he saw what the animal unearthed. Fabric, torn, weathered, and beneath it, something pale, almost porcelain in the soil. It wasn't porcelain. It was bone. Chapter 2, The Search That Went Nowhere. The first 48 hours after a disappearance are always the most critical. In those hours, witnesses remember details clearly. Evidence hasn't yet been washed away by time or weather, and the chances of recovery, alive, are at their highest. For Emily Carter and her 7-year-old son, Jacob, those 48 hours came and went without a single trace. The mobilization. When Emily's Subaru was found parked at the Roaring Brook trailhead, it instantly shifted the case from possibly delayed to missing persons. The Adirondack Park Rangers wasted no time. Within hours, dozens of trained searchers fanned out across the woods. They formed grid lines, calling names, using whistles, and marking trees with bright orange tape as they moved. The sound of voices echoed through the trees. Emily, Jacob. Volunteers from Hollowbrook and nearby towns joined in. Retired veterans, church groups, hikers who knew the area like the back of their hand. Some carried flashlights, others ropes, others first aid kits. Everyone carried hope. Helicopters swept overhead, their blades rattling the canopy. From above, the forest looked endless, a sea of gold and green. Heat sensors scanned for warm bodies, but the thermal cameras came up empty. It was as if Emily and Jacob had never stepped off the trail. Dogs and the lost scent. Tracking dogs were brought in next. One sniffed Jacob's hoodie from the backseat of the car and bolted toward the trailhead. Handlers struggling to keep up. For a moment, there was electricity in the air. They've got a scent, they've got something. The dog followed the path for about a mile before suddenly stopping. He circled, whined, pulled in different directions, and then lay down. The trail was cold. Another dog picked up a faint trace further in, but it ended the same way. Confusion, then nothing. Handlers later admitted it was as though the scent had simply evaporated. That detail stuck with investigators. People don't just vanish into thin air. Something had broken the trail. Theories began to divide. In the days that followed, speculation split into 2 camps. One camp believed Emily and Jacob had met with some kind of accident. Lost, injured, maybe even trapped in one of the many ravines or caves dotting the terrain. The Adirondacks are notorious for their hazards. Steep drop-offs, sudden weather changes, hidden creeks. To these searchers, it was only a matter of finding the bodies. The other camp wasn't so sure. The abrupt disappearance of both mother and child, the cold trail, the lack of dropped items or torn clothing. It didn't fit an accident. Some started whispering that they'd been taken. But taken by whom? The stranger in the woods. Sheriff's deputies canvassed nearby trailheads, gas stations, and rest stops. A few hikers recalled seeing a woman with a young boy matching Emily and Jacob's description earlier in the day. But when pressed for details, was she alone? Was anyone following them? The accounts became fuzzy. One witness swore he'd seen a man walking behind them, maybe 30 yards back. Tall, dark jacket, carrying something in his hands. But he couldn't describe the man's face. Another hiker insisted no one had been there at all. Was it a phantom memory, built from paranoia? Or had someone truly been shadowing them through the trees? Exhaustion and dread. By the fourth day, the search turned desperate. People pushed deeper into the woods, often against protocol, hoping for anything: an article of clothing, a shoe, a broken branch. Some claimed they heard faint cries in the distance, only to realize it was a wind carrying voices from other search parties. Rain fell on the fifth day, washing away footprints, diluting any lingering scent. Spirits sank. The forest, once alive with the sound of searchers, began to feel heavier, oppressive. And then came the chilling realization: if they hadn't been found by now, odds were they wouldn't be. The community fractures. Back in Hollowbrook, tension spread like wildfire. Emily's parents remained adamant. Their daughter and grandson had been taken. Emily would never leave her car locked, her wallet behind, as she planned to disappear. Someone was waiting for them. But others in town whispered different stories. That Emily had been struggling financially, that she'd talked about wanting a fresh start, that maybe she'd run off to escape the weight of her life. The sheriff shot those rumors down quickly. "We have zero evidence suggesting Emily left of her own free will," he said at a press conference. "This is an active investigation into a disappearance. We are treating it as suspicious." Still, the whispers lingered. The folklore factor. Adding to the unease was the folklore that clung to the Adirondacks. Older residents spoke of vanishings going back generations, hunters who never returned, campers who left their tents but not their belongings. The area where Emily's Subaru was found, some locals called it the Hollow Mile. Legend had it that people who strayed too far down its trails were swallowed. No sound, no trace, no goodbye. It was, of course, just a story. But as the search dragged on, as exhaustion and fear took hold, even the most rational people started wondering. Was this one of those times where the folklore had teeth? The cold declaration. After nearly 3 weeks of searching, the official announcement came. The Carter case was being shifted from active rescue to long-term investigation. Search parties dwindled. Helicopters stopped flying. Volunteers went home. For Emily's family, the silence was unbearable. Her father lashed out at the press. "They don't just get to stop looking. My daughter is out there. My grandson is out there. You don't just quit because it's hard." But behind closed doors, even investigators admitted what they feared most. The trail was gone. Whatever had happened in those woods, it had left no trail, no witness, no answers. Emily and Jacob had joined the long list of the Adirondacks lost. 2 years of waiting. As days became weeks, weeks became months, and months finally turned into 2 years, the case faded from headlines. The Carter family clung to rituals, lighting candles on Jacob's birthday, leaving the porch light on every night for Emily. But the town moved on. Hikers returned to the trails. Theories turned into little more than small-town ghost stories. Until that autumn morning, when a hunter's dog dug into the forest floor and unearthed something the woods had hidden for far too long. Chapter 3. 2 years of silence. For families of the missing, time doesn't pass in days or weeks. It passes in unanswered questions. Every sunrise brings a new round of what-ifs. Every night another struggle with the same empty space at the dinner table. For the Carter family, those 2 years after Emily and Jacob vanished were measured not in time, but in silence. Birthdays without balloons. The first milestone came just weeks after the search was called off. Jacob's 8th birthday. His grandparents, Thomas and Marlene Carter, decorated the kitchen anyway. They set out his favorite chocolate cake, placed wrapped gifts on the table, and lit 8 candles. The problem was, no one blew them out. Marlene's hands trembled as the flames burned down. Finally, she whispered, "We'll save the cake for when he comes home," and turned her face away before the tears spilled. By the time his 9th birthday rolled around, the tradition had become a painful ritual. They baked the cake. They wrapped the presents, but the joy was gone. The house felt like a museum of a boy frozen in time. Emily's shadow. Emily's absence was no less haunting. Friends describe her as fiercely devoted to Jacob, the kind of mother who carried extra snacks in her purse and double-knotted his shoelaces before school. Her best friend, Claire, refused to delete Emily's number from her phone. I kept thinking, one day it'll ring and it'll be her. She'll say there's been some mistake. That she's safe, Jacob's safe. That I worry for nothing. The call never came. Meanwhile, Emily's name became a fixture on community bulletin boards. Flyers weathered by rain, and snow still clung to lampposts. Some were bleached white by the sun, the ink fading until her smile was only a shadow. Theories turned toxic. As time stretched on, the whispers in Hollow Brook grew louder and crueler. Some still believed the mother and son had fallen victim to the wilderness. Others became convinced of darker explanations. Maybe she ran away with someone. A neighbor muttered in the grocery store line. People snapped. She didn't run. Marlene snapped back, overhearing. My daughter would never leave her boy. Still, the rumors persisted. One particularly vicious theory suggested Emily had harmed her own child in a moment of despair, then disappeared into the forest herself. Police dismissed it outright. There was no evidence, no history of abuse, no reason to suspect such a thing. But the cruelty of suspicion left scars on the Carter family that never healed. The cold case drawer. For investigators, the case became another file in the cold case cabinet. It wasn't forgotten, but it wasn't active either. Every few months, a detective would skim through the notes, follow up on a stray tip, then set it aside again. Technology offered no breakthroughs. There were no cell phone pings, no credit card use, no social media logins. Emily and Jacob had truly vanished off the grid, a state investigator later admitted. It was one of those cases that eats at you. You replay it in your head at night, wondering what you missed. But the truth was, there was nothing to follow, just an empty trail. The woods whisper, and yet the forest never stopped being part of the story. Hikers who passed the Roaring Brook trailhead would pause at Emily's Park Subaru, long since towed but remembered in eerie detail. Some claimed they felt watched when walking the paths. Others swore they heard faint voices in the wind, snippets of laughter, a child calling out. It was almost as if the Adirondacks had absorbed the memory of Emily and Jacob, folding their absence into its silence. Local kids dared each other to walk the Hollow Mile at night, the stretch of trail where the pair had last been seen. They told ghost stories around bonfires. If you listened closely, you could hear a mother calling her son's name, forever lost among the trees. Folklore had filled the void where facts failed, the weight of waiting. For Thomas and Marlene, the hardest part wasn't the pain, it was the not knowing. Every knock at the door made their hearts leap. Every unidentified body found anywhere in the state sent them into a spiral of phone calls. Every time a stranger posted a blurry photo online of a woman and boy resembling Emily and Jacob, hopes surged, only to be crushed again. Their house became a shrine to waiting. Emily's room was left untouched. Jacob's backpack still hung by the door, lunchbox inside, as if he'd come bursting in from school any minute. They couldn't move on because they didn't know where to move to. Forward? Backward? Sideways? The only thing worse than losing someone is never knowing if they're really gone. The second autumn. By the time the second October rolled around, the case was little more than a footnote in local memory. The Carter family marked the anniversary with a candlelight vigil at the trailhead. A few dozen people showed up, friends, neighbors, a scattering of search volunteers who still felt guilty about giving up. The woods loomed behind them, dark and unyielding, as prayers were spoken into the night air. But the forest stayed silent. No answers came, no closure, only the gnawing dread that the truth was still out there, just beyond reach, waiting. Then the dog dug, and then, one ordinary autumn morning, 2 years to the week since Emily and Jacob walked into the trees, the silence broke. Not with a phone call, not with a confession, not with a discovery by human hands, but with the frantic paws of a dog, clawing at the soil as if it knew the earth had a secret it could no longer keep. The dog's owner, Hunter Daniel Cray, would later say he almost didn't look. He thought it was a squirrel, maybe a rabbit hole, but when he saw the fabric in the dirt, tattered, sunk in wrong, his stomach turned cold, and when the bone appeared, pale against the black soil, he dropped to his knees. The forest had spoken at last. Chapter 4, The Hunter's Dog. The Adirondacks were at their most beautiful that morning. The kind of beauty that masks danger. The forest was painted in shades of fire, amber leaves drifting on a lazy breeze, shafts of sunlight piercing the canopy. To hunter Daniel Cray, it was the perfect day to track deer. To his golden retriever, Max, it was the perfect day to run. They had walked the same stretch of forest countless times. Daniel knew the ridges, the clearings, the deer runs. But Max's nose caught something different that day. He froze, head tilted, then bolted off the path, barking with a sharpness Daniel had never heard before. "Max!" Daniel shouted. His voice cracked through the stillness. The dog ignored him, vanishing into a thicket of brambles. Cursing, Daniel pushed through branches, the rifle on his back snagging against twigs. By the time he caught up, Max was already pawing furiously at the soil, dirt flying in all directions. His growls weren't playful. They were urgent, almost frantic. At first, Daniel assumed he'd found the scent of a fox den. Then his eyes caught something in the churned-up earth, a strip of fabric. Faded, stained. His heart thudded. He stepped closer. What looked like canvas at first glance was actually clothing, tattered, weather-beaten, buried deep in the soil. And beneath it, something white, smooth, fragile. For a moment, his brain fought the realization. It looked like porcelain. It was bone, the call to authorities. Daniel staggered back, bile rising in his throat. He yanked Max away, his hands trembling as he fumbled for his phone. "Sheriff's office," came the voice on the other end. "This is Daniel Cray. I think I found... Jesus, I think I found bones. Human bones. Out here in the forest, near Roaring Brook." The dispatcher's tone shifted instantly from routine to razor sharp. "Stay where you are, sir. Do not touch anything. A unit is on its way." Within an hour, sheriff's cruisers and state investigators were bumping down the dirt access road, tires crunching on gravel. Officers fanned out around Daniel's position, cordoning off the site with yellow tape. The hunter stood off to the side, pale, still clutching Max's collar, as if the dog might lunge back toward the grave. The unearthing. What followed was slow, meticulous, and horrifying. Crime scene technicians in gloves and masks crouched by the disturbed soil, brushing carefully with small tools, uncovering piece by piece what the forest had hidden. First came more fabric, a child's shirt, frayed and discolored, the cartoon print barely visible, then a shoe, so small it made one deputy quietly swear under his breath, and then unmistakably skeletal remains. Tiny, fragile, curled into the fetal position, as if the earth itself had tried to cradle them. The air grew heavy. No one spoke above a whisper. The reality settled in. This was not just a burial site. It was a grave. The sheriff's realization. Sheriff Alan Proctor, a grizzled man with 30 years in department, arrived on scene within the hour. He had been the one to stand beside the Carters at the trailhead vigil the year before, his hand on Marlene's shoulder, promising they hadn't been forgotten. Now, staring down at the small skeleton being gently lifted from the soil, his jaw tightened. "Get a perimeter on this entire area," he ordered. "Nobody in or out unless I say." But his eyes betrayed something his voice didn't. Dread. He knew the case wasn't just cold anymore. It had turned into something else. The second discovery. As the team worked, another chilling find surfaced. A second skeleton. Larger. Adult. It lay only feet away from the first, positioned awkwardly on its side, one arm bent under the ribs, as if reaching for the child even in death. The remains wore what had once been denim jeans. Around the wrist was a rusted bracelet, the kind Emily Carter's friends immediately recognized from photos. The mother, the son, together, just as they had vanished. Together, the media storm. Word traveled fast. By evening, reporters clustered at the trailhead, their cameras pointed toward the flashing police lights deeper in the woods. Helicopters hovered overhead again, not for search, but for spectacle. "Breaking news tonight," one anchor announced. 2 years after the mysterious disappearance of Emily Carter and her 7-year-old son Jacob, remains have been discovered in the Adirondacks believed to be theirs. For Hollowbrook, it was a moment everyone thought would bring closure, but instead, it brought only more questions. Forensics and fear. At the county morgue, the remains were carefully examined. Forensic anthropologists began piecing together the timeline. Both bodies showed signs of deliberate burial. The soil above them had been compacted unnaturally, layered in a way consistent with someone digging by hand or shovel. Emily's bones told a story of blunt trauma. Fractures inconsistent with a simple fall. Jacob's remains, though fragile, carried no such marks, but the position suggested he hadn't simply wandered and collapsed. This wasn't an accident. This was homicide. The family's collapse. When detectives delivered the news to Thomas and Marlene, it shattered the fragile hope they had clung to for 2 long years. Marlene collapsed into her husband's arms, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. "Not my baby, not my Jacob." Thomas, normally stoic, stared blankly ahead, his voice barely above a whisper. Who could do this? Who could bury them like animals? Their grief was echoed across the community. Candles once again lit the streets. But this time, there was no hope attached. Only mourning, unanswered questions. For investigators, the discovery solved only one mystery: where Emily and Jacob had gone. But the bigger question loomed larger than ever. Who put them there? The graves had been dug deep enough to suggest premeditation, not panic. The placement of the bodies, mother and child side by side, spoke to something chillingly intimate. And yet, there was no sign of belongings. No backpack, no phone, no weapon. Just bones, soil, and silence. The forest had given them back. But not their story. A case reopened. Sheriff Proctor stood before cameras days later, his badge gleaming under harsh lights. "This discovery has confirmed what many of us feared," he said. "Emily and Jacob Carter were victims of foul play. This is no longer a missing persons case. This is an active homicide investigation." But even as he spoke the words, one thing gnawed at everyone who had followed the case. If the killer had buried them so carefully, so close to the trailhead, how had hundreds of searchers missed it? Had the bodies been moved later? Or was someone watching the whole time? Someone who knew exactly how to hide them in plain sight? Chapter 5, The Truth Unearthed. The discovery of Emily and Jacob Carter's remains should have answered the town's most haunting question. Instead, it cracked the case wide open into darker, more unsettling territory. The forest had returned the missing. Now it was up to investigators to unearth the truth buried with them. The autopsy room, under the harsh glow of fluorescent lights. Forensic anthropologist Dr. Lila Mendez laid out the remains on stainless steel tables. She had seen tragedy before: plane crashes, cold cases, unidentified remains. But the sight of Jacob's small skeleton beside his mother's silenced even her seasoned team. "Mother and child," she murmured. "Whoever did this wanted them together." Emily's bones told a violent story. Her ribs were fractured in a way consistent with blunt force trauma. Her skull bore a faint but telling fracture across the temple, as if struck by something heavy. These injuries, Mendez concluded, had occurred before burial. Jacob's remains, however, were different. There were no fractures, no defensive wounds. What disturbed Mendez most was the placement. Curled tightly, knees drawn to chest, one small hand clutching the fabric of his mother's deteriorated shirt. "He didn't just collapse here," she said softly. "He was placed." The cause of Jacob's death? Indeterminate. But one chilling possibility rose above the rest: suffocation. Evidence in the soil. Forensic teams sifted every ounce of earth surrounding the grave. What they found complicated the story even further. Stratified soil layers suggested the grave had been dug after the initial disappearance, perhaps weeks or even months later. This meant Emily and Jacob may not have died the same day they vanished. Traces of lime were detected in the soil, a chemical sometimes used to speed decomposition and mask odor. This wasn't the work of someone panicking. This was someone who knew what they were doing. A rusted pocket knife was uncovered near the grave. Its blade snapped. The handle bore partial prints, degraded by time. And then came the most disturbing find of all: a strip of duct tape, buried several inches deeper, stuck to what had once been strands of blonde hair. A killer's signature. The presence of duct tape shifted the investigation entirely. To Sheriff Proctor, it screamed premeditation. This wasn't an accident in the woods. It wasn't a wrong turn, a slip, or even a random act of violence. Emily and Jacob had been subdued, controlled, and disposed of. This was deliberate, Proctor said grimly. Somebody brought them here to die. Theories reignite. The small town of Hollowbrook once again split into factions. Some believed it was the work of a stranger, a drifter passing through the Adirondacks who stumbled across Emily and Jacob on the trail. The tape, the lime, the shallow grave, all hallmarks of someone who had done this before. Others weren't convinced. If this had been a random killer, why was there no sign of robbery? Why bury them so close to the trailhead, within reach of searchers? Why take the risk? And then there was the theory that chilled the community most. The killer wasn't a stranger at all. The people closest. Detectives revisited everyone connected to Emily. Her estranged ex-husband, Mark Carter, was interviewed again. Their split had been bitter. Custody of Jacob a constant point of contention. Though Mark had an alibi, he'd been working out of state at the time of the disappearance. Investigators weren't satisfied. Friends described Emily's recent life as strained. She had confided in a co-worker about a man she thought was following her, someone she'd seen twice outside Jacob's school and again at the grocery store. She'd never caught his face clearly, but the unease had stuck with her. That detail, overlooked in the early days of the search, now loomed large. The forensic bombshell. Weeks into analysis, Dr. Mendez called Sheriff Proctor to the lab. She had something. On the duct tape strip, amid the degraded material, technicians had lifted a partial DNA profile. Not enough to enter into Cody's with certainty, but enough to suggest one thing. The DNA did not belong to Emily or Jacob. It belonged to an unidentified male. This means, Mendez said carefully, that whoever restrained Emily left part of himself behind. For Proctor, it was the first tangible lead in years. A ghost of a fingerprint, a shadow of DNA. Proof that someone else's hands had been on that tape. The community's fear. The revelation sent ripples through Hollowbrook. Parents clutched their children closer. Hikers avoided the trails where the bodies were found. At night, rumors took on a life of their own. They say he's still out there, one shopkeeper whispered. Watching. Waiting. Theories multiplied. Some believed it was a local woodsman, someone who knew the land better than law enforcement ever could. Others whispered it was a former ranger, a searcher who pretended to help but was really hiding his crime in plain sight. Whoever it was, the fact remained chillingly clear. For 2 years, the killer had walked free, the sheriff's burden. For Sheriff Proctor, the weight of the case became unbearable. He replayed every decision from the original search, every trail they hadn't followed, every lead they hadn't chased hard enough. He knew the press wanted answers. The family wanted justice. The community wanted safety. But the evidence pointed only to one terrifying truth. The person who killed Emily and Jacob had planned it well, had covered their tracks, and might even be someone trusted enough to slip through suspicion. "We've found their bodies," Proctor said in a closed-door briefing. "But we haven't found their killer. And I don't think he's done." The last piece of evidence. Just when investigators thought they had reached a standstill, another discovery shook the case again. In the soil beneath Emily's remains, buried deep in the bodies, crime scene techs unearthed a torn scrap of notebook paper sealed in a plastic bag. Time had warped it, water damage had blurred most of the ink. But one line was still legible. It read, "They shouldn't have gone off the trail." The meaning was unclear. Was it a warning? A taunt? A killer's confession? Or something far worse? Proof that Emily and Jacob's deaths were part of a pattern much larger than anyone realized? Chapter 6. The Unanswered Questions. The paper fragment unearthed beneath Emily and Jacob's bodies became the single most haunting piece of evidence in the entire case. They shouldn't have gone off the trail. The words echoed like a curse, sparking heated debate among investigators and townsfolk alike. A warning or a message? To some detectives, the note felt like a killer's taunt. Proof that someone had stalked Emily and Jacob that day, watching them wander deeper into the woods. To others, it read like a warning. Perhaps Emily and Jacob had stumbled into something they were never meant to see, a meeting, a hidden cabin, or something buried long before they ever disappeared. But why write it down? Why bury it? Sheriff Proctor stared at the blurred handwriting until his vision ached. It wasn't just a message. It was a ritual. The theories that wouldn't die. The discovery reopened every theory long buried with the case. The stranger theory, a drifter passing through, had preyed on Emily and Jacob. The note was his twisted way of bragging, his signature. The local theory, someone from Hollowbrook itself, a hunter, a ranger, a neighbor who knew the trails better than anyone. The note wasn't a warning at all, but a justification. They shouldn't have been there. The pattern theory, Emily and Jacob weren't the first. The duct tape, the lime, the stage burial, these were hallmarks of someone who had killed before. But without a match to the DNA, without a confession, all the theories remained just that, shadows and fog. The family's desperation. Mark Carter, Emily's ex-husband, broke down during a press conference. His face, whether from years of unanswered questions, twisted with rage. My son didn't deserve this. Emily didn't deserve this. Whoever did this is still out there, and every day they breathe free air is another day justice is denied. His pain only fueled the speculation. Was his outburst genuine grief, or frustration that the spotlight still hadn't shifted from him? The sheriff's silence. Behind closed doors, Sheriff Proctor confessed to his deputies what he couldn't admit publicly. This wasn't random, he said, his voice low, heavy. Someone lured them in. Someone left that note, knowing one day we'd find it. And if they've done it once, they'll do it again. His words chilled the room. Because if he was right, the Adirondacks weren't just haunted by one crime. They were hunting grounds. The final echo. In the months after the bodies were recovered, hikers reported unsettling encounters in the same stretch of woods. A woman swore she heard a child crying deep in trees, only to find no one there. A hunter claimed he found a tree carved with strange markings, an X intersected by 2 slashes, before vanished days later. A pair of campers returned to their site to find a scrap of duct tape stuck to their cooler. Coincidence? Or the killer's way of reminding the town that the story wasn't finished? The cliffhanger. The case was officially reopened, but no arrests were made. The DNA sat in limbo, waiting for a match. The note remained an enigma, and as autumn fell over Hollowbrook, parents told their children the same thing before bed. Don't go off the trail. But one fact lingered like smoke in the cold mountain air. Emily and Jacob weren't the only ones who had vanished in the Adirondacks. And if the hunter's dog hadn't dug where it did, the forest might never have revealed its secret at all.